students of color in particular don't have access to as many things as their white counterparts. So it's up to us as, student affair professionals of color to make that change and push institutions to be better. And that's a lot of work, right? Because you're tackling a huge institution, you're tackling white professionalism and navigating a system that maybe people before you have not.
Like support you in that mission, and so it allows you to
because you want to think about it. If you can give your attendees a win before
or through your company, so that business owners can actually matter that, we can all learn from that, because essentially. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Event Gems. My name is Natasha Wright, Chief Experience Curator at the Diamond Butterfly Production, and I am super excited for my conversation today with Vicky Matey. So today we're going to be talking all about how to really plan events for your organization, or if you're in an educational space, higher education, then we're going to talk about some ways in which you can build community, really organize and support the persons within your organization. So welcome, Victoria. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to be on your show.
Absolutely. I'm super excited for this conversation because I do feel that it's one of the topics that I don't necessarily focus on, but I feel like it's such an important topic, especially for persons who are organizing events as a part of an organization. So can you just tell us a little bit about your background? How is it that you came to do what you were doing? And now you're a podcaster. So can you talk about the transition there as well?
Yeah, 100%. So I started organizing as a student at Whatcom Community College, and it was my first job. I am an undocumented person and was not able to apply for work in the United States until I received DACA. And DACA really changed my life for me. It gave me the opportunity to apply myself and get support that I hadn't had in the past. So when I was at Whatcom, there was people applying for positions, to plan events, to be on the programming and diversity board, to be engaged actively in higher education. And I was like, this is great. I can do this, manage my classes, and it's flexible. And turns out I ended up loving it. I ended up loving event planning. I had amazing mentors that helped me transition into even higher event planning positions. After my second year there, I planned an entire conference with a committee, and I had no idea what I was doing. But the best thing is that people believed in me and that people trusted me, right? That event ended up being amazing, and I just really wanted to stick with it. Moving forward, I went to Western Washington University. I kept event planning from, again, conferences, attending conferences. I'm a speaker first and foremost, so speaking at a lot of events and always assessing how we could be better for students, how we could be more inclusive, how we were going to make sure that people took action after those events, right? That they took the information we taught them and used it in their everyday lives and shared it with others. Once I graduated, I became the programming and events manager at Western Washington University for their Multicultural Center. And again, I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew that I could plan events, and I knew that I had people that I could count on to support me in that. So navigating all of that was a really beautiful experience because it really pushed my limits. It was always a challenge, right? Like that rush of an event day is one of the best feelings in the world. Even if things go wrong, you just go. That go mode is one of my favorite things. And like you mentioned, I have transitioned to full-time podcasting. I am the host of Shot of Truth podcast, and all of the skills I learned in event planning are applicable here and now. Very much so.
Yeah, I love that. And you know what? I think that that's such an interesting trajectory to hear your story, from being undocumented to, working in different spaces. And what I hear also in the background of it all is that you had support, that you had people who supported you, who believed in you, and also that you don't have to feel like you have it all figured out right away. You can pretty much, say, all right, I have the confidence in myself that I will figure it out, that I can do this, and then just go with it and and start, essentially. So I think that that's such an important point that you brought up. I think during the civil protests that we saw last year, particularly with the Black Lives Matter movement, one of the things that I noticed, especially within the event space, is that there was a lot more talk about diversity and there was a lot more talk about inclusion. So can you talk about, from your perspective, why that is important and some of the things that you've decided to incorporate as you go through as a speaker or an event planner, why that's important to have that multicultural voice?
Yeah, so I think it's, a lot of people of color, women of color, black women, black men, this is the first time that we're entering these spaces and really challenging them and pushing them to be better, right?
Hmm.
We know what our students need, we know what our communities need, and for us to be able to take that microphone and take the lead on those events is one of the most important things we can do. I truly believe that we know what our communities need most. And so when we create these spaces, we're not just creating them for ourselves, we're creating them again to motivate people, to be there for people, to build community, to network, all these things that I feel are crucial to people's internal success, external success. We had a lot of, making sure that when I worked in higher education, like making sure that students had what they needed during that time, had access to counselors, even though, we weren't in person, making sure that people had access to food. We often know that students of color in particular don't have access to as many things as their white counterparts. So it's up to us as, student affair professionals of color to make that change and push institutions to be better. And that's a lot of work, right? Because you're tackling a huge institution, you're tackling white professionalism and navigating a system that maybe people before you have not.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And I think when you were talking, like I'm even thinking about like, what about like the red tape of like doing certain things? Like, did you come up against any red tape in terms of any issues or agenda that you wanted to push, particularly in that time?
Yeah. I think that, students are always organizing, and I'm talking specifically about students because that's my experience in working around events, but, like,
Mm-hmm.
students are always organizing because they know that they deserve so much more, and so, if there's an event that isn't intentional, that isn't planned well, that isn't inclusive, that doesn't provide something for them, then it's not working, and they will let you know. And I think, that's when we listen as professionals and we're like, "All right, what can we do to be better?" And I think what often happens is a lot of people take that as an attack when it's not. When it's people really trying to justify and fight for what they need and what they want and for other generations that come after them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it shouldn't just be on us as people of color to advocate for ourselves, right? So it's very important that we let our voices be known and heard so that, others can also advocate on our behalf. So I think that that's such an important point. And then so let's talk about building community, because I do believe that that's an important part of making more impact, and doing things in a way that can be more inclusive and can be multicultural. And also, I think just providing more information so that the broader society can understand like what it is from different perspectives, right? So can you talk about how can events like help us? I know one of the points that you brought up was intentionality, and I think that that's such an important point. But how can we be intentional about building communities or using events to build communities, and why is that important?
I think starting with like who's your audience and going from there, what does this community need most? What does this community, what kind of speakers do they want to see? How can we create spaces within these events where people are able and comfortable to have conversations and network with people? I think that, and another thing, this is so small, but I think it's so big, and it's providing food at these events, especially like in-person events, because we as communities of color typically celebrate over food, and food is always part of our celebrations of even
Yes, because I love
even
food.
like yeah, and even when things are hard, right? We
Mhm.
heal through food. We heal and, move our bodies through dance in ways of celebration and healing, and I think, finding that and building off of that, when building community, like I think the biggest thing is like, how can we move forward? How can we continue this? How can we make this not just a here and now moment, but how can we continue this relationship? How can we work together in the future? How can we build upon this? How can we take action? And I always tell people, like, we are all educators. And as educators,
Mhm.
we need to challenge these systems. We need to build upon them, and we need to make sure that other people have access to them too.
Yeah, and one of the things too, I think, especially with events, is that you definitely have to like bring in some type of element that will you break up everything, for the attendees. So I love that you brought in dance, and you can even bring in something that's wellness related or yoga related. I think that those are important things. Like even if you're dealing with like a heavy issue or a heavy topic, there's a way for you to break it up so that the information can be retained, but it's also a way for people to have fun while they're in the space, so that it could be more impactful for them. And so, as we talk about just breaking things up, one of the things that has entered into our lexicon as a result of COVID-19 is Zoom fatigue.
Yeah.
And I think I had a description of what that is. I read it online, so I'll just go ahead and say it here. I know that you guys have heard about it, but I just wanted to give you a further explanation of what it is. So Zoom fatigue has now entered our lexicon due to the pandemic, and it describes the tiredness, worry, or burnout associated with overusing virtual platforms for communication. So I know that you've planned some virtual events, some fun, some cultural or civic related. Can you talk about how you're incorporating any type of engaging element so that we can break up or deal with Zoom fatigue?
Yeah, so whatever is interactive, I think people are gonna kind of hold on to a little bit more. I know this is like kind of hard to hear, but like whenever I do any kind of presentation or event, I always like say, how can I make this about them? And if I can make this about them, there's something that they can take away from this. So there's ways to do interactive things where people can message something into their phone and it'll pop right up onto the screen, right? So I think there's different tools that people are creating and using to make things a lot more engaging. For example, I'm speaking at a conference this weekend and I'm like, how am I going to do breakout groups? I know people don't like that, or it really depends on the people you're working with too. Like again, knowing your audience and knowing like, I know this group will work better in a larger group. I know this group will work better in small groups. Or maybe we send out a project for people to do and then they implement by sending in the photos, right? It doesn't have to be a virtual conversation. It could be something where people are like, hey, we're going to have this day, take these photos and upload them to these files, and we'll do something with them. There's ways to create even while being apart. And to speak to like kind of the work I've been doing, I'm recording more and working with more people now virtually than I ever have in person. So there are, some pluses to all of this too,
Mm-hmm.
in access to who you can work with. People that you can work with literally outside of your state, outside of the country. And I think that's huge. And I think that's not going to go away. So we need to find ways to be creative, right?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And I feel like, sometimes I go on to some of these Zoom events and it's just like, oh my God, after an hour or so, like you do feel that fatigue and you do feel like, all right, well, I need to go do something else, or you start multitasking.
Yeah.
And multitasking is one of the worst ways. You might feel like you can multitask, but I think it like reduces your productivity. I read a study that it reduces your productivity by about 40%. So if there is information that's being said, multitasking might not be the best way for you to be able to retain that information and to be engaged. But I think like some of the elements that you just spoke about before are great ways that we can incorporate to keep people engaged, keep them on longer. Because I do feel that that's one of the challenges right now with event organizers in the virtual event space is that it's you're not sure like how long people are going to stay on, and it's difficult to like have them stay on for the entire event. So doing things like that, or virtual photo booths,
Mhm.
that can really maximize the reach that your event has, I think is amazing. And then, so can you tell us a little bit about your podcast, Shot of Truth? What is it that you talk about? What are some of the topics that you speak about as well?
Yeah. So Shut Up Truth podcast was really created because I had been speaking for 7 years on being undocumented, but not so much my story, but really like let's talk about the language. Let's talk about the criminalization of immigrants. Let's talk about the historical context. Let's talk about locally where we're at and how immigrants have been impacted here. And as I kept, speaking and speaking, I was like, it's always me with the microphone, like me in front. Why me? And I was like, how can I make this more inclusive? How can I incorporate other people into this work? And my best friends and I just decided to start a podcast. And 3 years later, here we are. We just released our 43rd episode. And it's been one of the most amazing things I've ever done, right? And it was something you just had to jump in and do. We do topics around like undocumented folks and like, yes, their stories, but they share knowledge about their background, who they are, how they
Mhm.
got their LLC, how to buy a home, while you're undocumented, how to navigate higher education, learning about, we interviewed the lawyer that took the uh, Supreme Court case to DACA, and
Mm.
he's a DACA recipient himself, and he's one of my closest friends now. So like we're building community, we're building a network, we're sharing knowledge, we're sharing our stories in ways that people have never heard before, right? Or understood. And so with this podcast, I don't know what's gonna happen, I'm just gonna keep doing it to the best of my ability and hope that other people find the healing that I have within this space because personally, I was a really angry person
Mhm.
for so long and I was so hurt. I didn't know how to have these conversations. I didn't know how to build that community that I needed essentially to survive, right? And now I have so much compassion for people. Even if I don't agree with them, like I have so much compassion for them because I know that we're ever evolving humans with so much to build and so much to create and so much to share too.
Ah, I love that. I mean, I'm an immigrant myself, and so I am so aligned with the work that you're doing. So congratulations on what you guys have been doing with the podcast, and just super inspiring the work that you're doing as well. I do know a lot of undocumented workers, or I'm sorry, undocumented immigrants, and it's a shadowy world, right?
Yep.
To be in that space where you're constantly looking over your shoulder, you're not being sure, you get taken advantage of as a result of that. And so I think that the work that you guys are doing just makes my heart smile. So thank you for what you do. And then I think I would love to hear like how you find your voice in that, because you could have just been in the shadows, and you could have like not come forward and have these conversations because for fear of what the retribution might be. So how did you find your voice to really like stand up and speak out about some of these issues?
So I will say that I'm a little bit of a rebel, especially when I was younger. And so when my parents said, don't talk about this, I was like, well, I'm going to talk about it and I'm going to look up everything and I'm going to figure it out. And this
Mm-hmm.
was when I was in 6th grade when Bush was being elected.
Mm.
And that's when I found my voice of like, I'm going to speak to this, even if people don't care, even if people have mean things to say. And people did have a lot of mean things to say. I was not treated well by some of my teachers in high school and middle school because of my situation. But when I got into higher education, I felt so lost and so confused. And it wasn't until I found an undocumented student group that I was like, let's do this. I was the president of Blue Group, the undocumented student club at Western Washington University in 2016, the year Trump got elected. I
Mm.
had no idea what that was going to mean for me, but I remember I told Blue Group that day, this is the year that nobody forgets who we are. And that's what we did. We worked with so many local organizations. We took students to lobby at the local level, state level, federal level. We were all over the news because we refused to stay silent, right? We knew that our families did so much to give us that voice. And even if it was scary for them, because it's still scary for them,
Mhm.
um, we knew that if people saw us, and I always tell people when I present, I'm like, now that you saw me present, it is your social responsibility to show up if I get detained.
Mm.
It's that action step. I'm
Mhm.
not just gonna sit here and tell you my story or tell you, X, Y, and Z. I need you to do something about it. And we're gonna collectively do something about it because this is about humanity. This isn't about anything else. And so I think once I found that voice and was able to help others find it, it you can't stop.
Yeah, yeah, it's super inspiring, and it's almost like it becomes like a chain reaction too. And I love that you're like, listen, you need to do something about it. You know what I mean? Like it's not just like hearing my story, but what is the action step that you're gonna take? And I think also one of the things that I heard you say is about collaboration, like how those collaborative efforts or organizations that you worked with helped you to like really get your message out and get and helped you like with the mission that your organization had. So can you talk about how do you collaborate? Like, do you just reach out to people? How do you be strategic about collaboration, especially for a mission driven cause?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing was establishing some kind of credibility of like, I'm this person and I want to help other people. And I think once people saw that, it was genuine, it was authentic work, people were much more willing to work with us, work with me. I know that even with, we got thrown into a lot of community organizing. We were hosting events and fundraisers like every single week, multiple of them. And I was always being pushed to my limits to just jump and do it, right? And again, that was really just where, where the magic happens when you just jump in and do it. I think that, I've been able to connect with people from all over the country more recently because after 3 years, like our podcast is finally picking up. People know who we are. People are reaching out to us now to be on it. And that's so rewarding. I never thought that that would happen, right? And I constantly battle with the like, why am I doing this? Why me? And I think again, it's that mindset, it's that imposter syndrome that all of us have to navigate.
Mhm.
But jumping in and doing it is where the magic really does happen.
I so agree with you. It's you're doing something over and over. You're like, when is it gonna quote unquote pay off? Or when are you gonna get like your day in the sun type of thing? And sometimes the work that you're doing isn't necessarily recognized or people don't even really know about it. But then it comes this like tipping point where now people know about you. Now they're reaching out, and so I saw someone posted a t-shirt design or something, and it was like, I'm dope. I've been dope. You late, And I was like, I love
I
that
love that.
because it's like, first of all, you have to have the confidence and the belief in yourself to even start something new or do a new venture. There's a lot of things that could really get in the way, trepidation, fear, all of that. And to actually like do it, like you and get to the place where you have the confidence to do it, like you're dope for even like stepping out, So it's just a matter of everybody else pretty much like catching up to it. And I think, for a lot of the listeners, if you guys are, new entrepreneurs, you're just starting out, just know that you just have to keep going. You just have to be consistent, and consistently show up for yourself, and continue to build your brand. And, you'll get to a point where there is a tipping point, like you were talking about, Victoria, where now it's become more of a national thing where in collaborative effort with different organizations. So let's give the people some gems about like staying inspired and staying in motion. Like, how has that worked for you for 3 years? You could have been like, listen, year one, I'm done. And I know it's a huge statistic of even podcasts that don't make it, past their first year, or even don't even make it fully out of a season. So can you talk about that process for you? Like, how do you stay inspired to keep doing this podcast, to keep with the movement and the mission that you're working with?
It is so hard. It is so hard to find the self-accountability, right?
Yes,
The
that
time
part.
management, like, being, like, holding yourself accountable and being like, "I'm doing this for a purpose," and I think when it really, like, hits me that it's paying off and that it's working is when people contact me and they're just like, "Oh my gosh," like, I can relate to that. Or I have people say like, "I was just thinking about buying a first home and I didn't know where to start. Now I'm connected to somebody that knows how." And so,
Mm.
like, I think what really gets me going is engaging with the people that, who is my audience. And that has been building those relationships. It's not just like an interview for me. It's never just an interview for me. It's let's build something together. Let's collaborate in the future. Let's, if somebody reaches out to me and it's like, I'm looking for a graphic designer that's undocumented. Hey, I know 4 or 5 of them. I'll hook you up. And
Nice.
so it's all about showing up for each other in different ways. And I think that is what keeps me going, is that I know it's making a difference now. But before, it was really like pulling myself to do it. I know that I had a co-host when I first started, and her heart just wasn't in it the way that mine was, and so, we collectively decided it was best that I just continued. Um, and if you pour your heart and soul into something and you're authentically showing up for it, people are gonna see that. People are gonna love that, right? Like, if
Mhm.
people believe in what you do and you do it authentically with so much love and compassion, like, there's no way that it won't have that tipping point.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Can you talk about that a little bit? The part where, like you had to separate from your partner. And I feel like there's always like a very conscious way that we could go about doing that so it doesn't, have any sort of animosity on either side. But I know that, especially if you're working on an event, like you're probably gonna be a part of
Of a
a,
team.
a team, right? And so there might be friction or there might be, situations where you have to say, all right, well, maybe we need to part ways, or maybe, somebody else might be better to work on this part of the project. So can you talk about even collaborating from a team perspective, and that dynamic and how to make that a more fruitful relationship?
So first I have to admit that it wasn't a good transition for us in our
Mhm.
relationship as friends and people and working partners. It wasn't.
Okay.
But now that I reflect on it, right, the way that I would approach that is so differently. It was never, I was taking it so personally, but it wasn't about me, right? There was
Mhm.
other things happening in that person's life that took priority that they needed to focus on in order to be their full self. And that didn't include this project. Whereas for me,
Mhm.
it did. For me, this was I knew I wanted to do this. My heart was in it from the beginning. And I do have another person that I work with, Caleb Nelson, who's the producer. And we're always learning how to work together, even though we've been working together for 3 years, right? And I think, establishing like, "Yo, we care about this work, we care about what we're doing. How can we make it work for both of us? How can we both be flexible? How can we both, show up sometimes to those late nights that we have to pull," right? Um, it's all back down to communication, and that's hard. That is one of the hardest things that people have to learn, and also like holding yourself accountable to how you also react, how you and your body language responds, right? I think
Mhm.
we're often talking about communication about, between two people, but also like how do we hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is helpful, that is gonna allow you to grow as a team, as partners. I know conflict comes up in a lot of team dynamics. There's there's actual ways to work through it. And a lot of that means mediation. A lot of that means stepping outside of it and realizing that it's not about you personally, that it's about something else. If I think if you have this goal and you're all like driven by that goal, it'll be so much easier to attain. But obviously, there's going to be hiccups. There'll always be hiccups, And when an event is happening and it's day of, and you're running around with your head off, and everybody's coming to you for everything, just like take a second and breathe, and like be happy that people are even there, right? Like at if anything goes wrong, the show goes on. Everything keeps going and going and going. We are flexible, we adapt, we're adaptive leaders. That's how we survive in this world. We adapt to our environment, we adapt to the team we're working with, we adapt to the way that we work in environments. Um, so I guess that's my advice is like hold yourself accountable.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And I always think about, when I'm irked by someone, I think about, well, what is it in me that I could change, or what can I do differently to make this relationship a better relationship or a better working relationship, right? Or what is it that I need to say? Because sometimes we don't necessarily talk about like what it is that's going on in us internally, and instead we kind of like lash out, or it comes out in unproductive ways. So for sure, I think that that's such great advice about looking at yourself and seeing what you could do about it and how can you hold yourself accountable. And for sure, that part that you talked about with, when you're working on an event and you're running around and you have to be flexible and adaptive, because for sure, I don't think I've ever worked on an event where something didn't go the way that it was supposed. It's Murphy's Law, right? It always happens. So you always have to, plan for those things to show up or happen that you didn't necessarily plan for, but also being like quick on your feet and adaptive, to being able to move through them and work through them. And then the thing too is, sometimes when you're in that space and you're somewhat stressed out, the people around you could be the ones who get the brunt of it, right? You might be short, you might be curt. So it's also having like a really good team dynamic where the other person know, or that, look, it's just it was due to the stress, you know what I mean, of that moment, and it doesn't necessarily impact how I feel about you, and it doesn't like ruin the relationship as a result. So I think that that's so important. So Victorious, thank you so much for being here. You are a wealth of information. I just absolutely love you, your podcast, what you guys stand for, the mission that you want to create in this world. So let people know how they can stay connected with you. Well, first, before you do that, I always like to ask, like, what is one last gem that you'd like to drop, whether that could be life related, event related, anything. So what's one last gem?
My last gem that I honestly have learned in my solitude through COVID is stop and listen to the birds. Stop and really just take everything in. Go on a walk and breathe. Practice your breathing. Sit in that stillness, because event planning, organizing, everything is so hectic. Social media, marketing, all of it is so consuming. I think, we need to make more time to ground ourselves and ground our spirits. And that's where we find the pieces of ourselves that we didn't know were there, right? So that is my final gem for y'all.
Beautiful. I love it. Okay, so let people know how they could follow you and stay connected with you.
Yes, you can follow me at shotoftruthpodcast.com. I'm actually releasing a ton of my speaking engagement work there. You can follow us on Instagram, on Twitter. We have a TikTok as well. Just any of the social media, it's Shot of Truth Podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victoria, for being here. Thank you, guys. Have a great day. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, share, and subscribe to Event Gems. Until next time, I'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Support you in that mission, and so it allows you to
because you want to think about it. If you can give your attendees a win
or through your company, so that business owners can actually matter that, we can all learn from that, because essentially